My name is Dr. Christian Koch. I am the Director of Research at the Gulf Research Center, and I will have the pleasure also of moderating today's discussion. What we want to do is to really focus on an aspect of the very fragile security environment in the Arabian Gulf, the Gulf of Oman, the Gulf of Aden, and the Southern Red Sea, and of course also including the two passageways of the Straits of Hormuz and Bab-el-Mandeb, where the region has really seen an increase in the challenge to overall security threats in recent years. So what we really want to do sort of over the course of the next hour is just analyze a little bit deeper the maritime security issues around the Arabian Peninsula, not only in terms of the direct threats that exist, but of course also from a couple of other perspectives, including the link between maritime security and energy security. I think it's important, of course, at the outset to sort of recognize that maritime security does bring together many different aspects of commercial security, political interests, and it's been recognized over the years as a critical element in the Gulf. So we are talking here about issues such as demarcation of borders, exclusive economic zones, maritime connections, shipping passages, as well as environmental concerns and effects of climate change. So it's an issue that's much broader than just the sort of the hard security and military matters. But at the same time, we have, of course, witnessed direct attacks on maritime traffic in all of the waters that surround the Arabian Peninsula. Most recently, just of course, the seizure of the UAE flagged vessel Rawabi in the Red Sea by Houthi rebels in Yemen at the beginning of January. Now, that increase in attacks has led to a number of responses, both regionally and internationally. On a regional level, just as one example, the UAE has discussed with Iran Maritime Border Corporation and the flow of shipping traffic during some meetings that recently have been held in the region. And internationally, we've had the deployments of two maritime missions to the region. First, the United States created the International Maritime Security Construct with its Operation Sentinel to protect commercial ships in the Gulf. And for this mission, Washington enlisted the support of Bahrain, where we have the base of the US Fifth Fleet, Saudi Arabia and the UAE, as well as Australia and the United Kingdom. Second, though, we also have an initiative from the European Union, which is the European-led Maritime Awareness in the Strait of Hormuz, MSO, and its military arm, Agenor. This endeavor, which operates out of the French naval base in Abu Dhabi, similarly aims to ensure freedom of navigation, although it is a little bit unclear, and we'll definitely talk about that in our session today, a little bit to the degree that the two missions, the US and the European one, actually coordinate their activities. So what does seem clear is, at least from a Gulf regional perspective, is that the international community role in protecting the freedom and security of navigation in the Gulf and Arabian Sea areas has been limited in their effectiveness, as attacks and interference in the right of free navigation have continued, and has harassment on the seas occurred frequently, with really out a visible deterrent factor or relative punishment actions to follow. So this is an issue that we want to follow in today's discussion in how maritime security efforts in the waters surrounding the Arabian Peninsula can be made more effective. And for this, we really have an excellent panel of three speakers with us today. I will just name them very briefly in the order of them speaking. We will start with Dr. Mustafa Alani, who is Head of Defense and the Security Program at the Gulf Research Center. Dr. Alani is a frequent commentator on political and security developments in the Middle East region in general, and specifically focus on the security issues affecting the Gulf states. Second, we have with us Ambassador Jakob Tanger, the senior civilian representative to the European Mission for the Strait of Hormuz. Prior to his current role, Ambassador Tanger has served in various positions in the Danish Foreign Service, including as ambassador to Afghanistan. obviously not a very easy post to be able to handle. And then third, we will have with us Jeffrey Payne, assistant professor at the Near East and South Asia Center for Strategic Studies of the National Defense University in Washington. Professor Payne directs and pilots NISA's maritime security programming, including its ongoing series devoted to the Indian Ocean region and the wider Indo-Pacific. In addition, he leads NISA's engagement related to maritime and littoral information sharing and data analysis. So we've asked each of our speakers to provide us with some very brief remarks of approximately 7 to 10 minutes, which will then be followed by discussion rounds and questions from the audience. Now you can submit your questions to the Q&A function in Zoom. I believe we are all too familiar by now of how these systems work. Let us know, and then please post them in the chat so that we can pass them on also to our speakers. I do want to mention that this event is on the record and is thus being recorded. So just to be aware of that. And therefore now, without further ado, Dr. Mustafa, you want to lead us off with some remarks?
Thank you very much. Yes. Yeah. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone, depending on geographical location. I will try to reflect, because the nature of my work here in the region, I will try to reflect the view from the region. The government view. I'm not an official in the government, but I can give some idea. You have to remember this region witnessed event which is very unique in the term of maritime security. The tankers war during Iraq-Iran war, and we're talking about hundreds and hundreds of ships and tankers was destroyed, damaged, disabled. And this was unique in the modern history of the international relation. Then we face I was working in my previous life in counterterrorism, and we have 4 forms of threats in the region. This is at least how we look at it. We have state threat. And here I'm talking clearly about the Iranian behavior in the region. State threat to the Revolutionary Guard naval forces, responsible for a number of attacks on ships, regional and international ships. And this is very well known that the Iranians are targeting the security and the freedom of navigation in this area, and even beyond it. Then when I mention the Iranian, I cannot ignore the Israelis. So far, according to our knowledge, the Israelis are responsible for 12 attacks on the Iranian ship, tankers or normal ships, whether in the Arabian Sea, Gulf of Oman, Gulf of Aden, even in the Red Sea. Again, I mean, a power coming from outside the region, conducting operation attacks in the region. And we understand that the Iranians were able to organize 4 attacks against the Israeli, and the Israeli 12 attacks. Okay, this is the state one. We have state-sponsored militia attack. And here the Houthi is very active in this picture. And the attack of Houthi never denied their responsibility on a number of attacks, whether a drone or actual attack on the mining of Bab-el-Mandeb and other. Again, it is a state-sponsored militia. We have the third form of activities is the terrorist activities, although it's now under control. But if you look at the few years back, there's so many attacks from Al-Qaeda, from Daesh, on ships like USS Cole, like Limburg, French oil tanker, and there is a long list of now it is come under control and it's become manageable threat. Then we have the organized criminal activities, and here the piracy. The piracy was very active in this region, the Somali piracy and other piracy. So I don't see there is any other region. If you look at the whole world, you don't see a region which is subjected to 4 forms of maritime threat in the recent history. All of them were very effective. All of them was to deal with it was very difficult. On the other hand, I have to say, the regional state, and I'm talking about the GCC state, they have no capacity or naval capacity to protect the security and the freedom of navigation in the region. The capacity existed within the GCC state is Coast Guard capacity. The biggest state in the GCC, which is Saudi Arabia, but because the nature of the state, the geographical nature of the state, they have their naval forces divided for 2 parts: Eastern fleet and Western fleet. One is operating in the Red Sea and the other operating in the Gulf region. So again, I mean, the capacity of Saudi Arabia to provide protection and security, it is really, I don't think we can rely on that. On the other hand, the international community, we believe the international community is not fulfilling the task and providing real security or real freedom, protecting the freedom of navigation in this region. And if you look at, there is no deterrent to the Iranian or even to the Houthi. There's no punishment. If you look at the record, the recent attack never been punished and still continuing. So again, there's a huge failure of international community, of lack of action on the international community to provide security in this region. So we're talking about a region which again lack any form of maritime security system. There is no any form of understanding between the state and the region to develop some sort of maritime understanding, even on the non-sensitive issue. You like environment, like criminal activities, like you have a state-to-state agreement, but you don't have collective action, effective action, which can bring all the countries agree on the providing security on non-sensitive issues. So I think we're facing a problem in this region, and I don't see there's an easy way out, especially when the international community have a relaxed attitude toward this problem. I will stop here and allow the other colleagues to contribute.
Yes, thanks a lot, Mustafa. First of all, for sort of outlining, the different types of threats that exist in the region, and I very much take your point about how this part of the world is facing, the variety of threats, and maybe the only region that faces all 4 types of threats. And then also your arguments on the lack of capacity within the region, but also the lack of what could be classified as a sufficient response from the international community to the threat. But I'm sure we'll get into that a little bit in our discussion as well. Ambassador Tunga, can I ask you to come online and give us a little bit of an overview also from the European perspective on this important issue?
Certainly. Thank you very much. First of all, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, good.
Can
because I'm I'm transmitting from my iPad. Zoom is unfortunately not supported by my organization, so I had to be a little bit inventive here and do something else. But I hope I do not run out of battery while we speak. But thank you very much for inviting me also to give a few comments on behalf of MSO for this seminar. It's certainly a very difficult platform to move on from after Mr. Alani said we needed a better maritime security system in the region. It's not because I disagree, but I think we are doing what we can. I'll try to explain that. My name is Jakob Tang. I'm a Danish diplomat, as was said before, and I'm here also because I'm the senior civilian representative of MSO, which stands for the European Maritime Awareness in the Strait of Hormuz. I realize, obviously, that the world security focus is, especially for the time being, not on the Persian Gulf, but elsewhere. But I still believe it's very timely and very important that we have this discussion. So I will give a very brief outline of the idea and background and objective of MSO, hopefully using not more than my 10 minutes. So I will just speak a bit about the architecture, the objective, the background, the members, the setup of MSO, and then end by giving a few comments on the current situation and also looking into the future. First of all, what is MSO? It's a European maritime surveillance and reassurance operation in the Strait of Hormuz, and basically it's a political mission with support of a military operation called Ashanor, as was also said. If we look at the Strait of Hormuz, it's also obviously an area of great interest to the EU and European countries. It's very important. It's a very important sea passage. If you look at the number at the commercial traffic going through the strait, the MSO countries account for about 33%, so 1/3 of the deadweight that is transported through the sea. So it's certainly of our interest also that we are able to sail through and that you can do so safely and securely. The background for MSO, which is actually having its 2 years anniversary this week, so again very timely, was that at that point in time 2 years ago, we also saw that there was a fairly unstable maritime situation in the Strait. There were a number of incidents that were threatening also European ships. And these incidents, I think we have seen them continue also in 2020 and 21. Actually, the numbers have increased, even though the severity may not have increased. But I think we counted more numbers and more incidents in 21 than we did in 2020. At that point in time, back in the end of 2019, the Europeans did not necessarily agree on the then US approach of maximum pressures. We did think there was perhaps a little bit of a different view of the situation there and what should be done to counter it. And at the time, it was not possible actually to do a common EU mission, and therefore we ended up with what is basically a coalition of the willing. This is not an EU mission, but it's a mission with a number of European countries participating. And the objective is basically very simple to assure freedom of navigation through the strait and its approaches. And we try to do that by maintaining an autonomous situation appreciation. We try to contribute to a stabilized environment. And then obviously we also want to try to promote the European perspective and presence at the sea. I'll get back to that. We have 9 members of the mission, which is France, Greece, Portugal, Belgium, Germany, the Netherlands, Italy, Denmark, and then we also have Norway participating for the time being. Only some of these countries provide military assets. That is France, Denmark, Italy, and the Netherlands who have been doing so. The basic setup is that we have 2 tracks. We have a diplomatic track and we have a military track. The diplomatic track is for the time being headed by Denmark, by me, the senior civilian representative. And the idea of that is basically to enter into dialogue with the states of the region, with all countries in the region. And obviously we do have a problem with reaching the Iranians for the time being. And the aim is to identify ways to contribute to de-escalation and tensions in the region. So that's one track. The military track, which is headquartered in Abu Dhabi on the French naval base there, basically ideally should have 2 frigates and air support. For the time being, we have a little bit less, but the idea is that we should at any given time have two frigates there. And in that headquarter, there are a lot of member countries contributing with the liaison officers there. So the principles of MSO is what we call a light footprint approach. We observe, we monitor, but we do not engage, and that's very important to understand. That's kind of the principle of the mission. So it's a principle of neutrality, of dialogue, of de-escalation, and we try to preserve stability and to avoid escalation. So that's basically the idea of the mission. If you look at the current situation and also looking a little bit into to the future, we still believe that the security situation in the Gulf remains volatile. I think that's what we heard already today. And this instability in the region is also critical to global trade and stability as such. And we do believe that the underlying regional tensions persist. And there is, unfortunately, a potential for new incidents and risk of and the risk of escalation remains, as we have seen. Therefore, we also think and we acknowledge the continued need for the preventive efforts of MSO. Now, for the time being, MSO, the extension we have made is until the end of 2022. And we are going to use that time also to find out what should be the future setup of the operation, because it is a temporary mission, a coalition of the willing, and the will obviously has to persist for the mission to continue. So we are discussing different scenarios. There is a new EU CMP mission coming up in the Northwest Indian Ocean. Perhaps we can have a closer cooperation with that. We are also discussing with the IMSC to get back to your question in the beginning, Christian, on perhaps increased cooperation between IMSC and MSO. And we are also discussing what should be the relation with Atalanta, which is another European mission outside the coast of Somalia. So getting back to the regional developments, as was already mentioned here today, perhaps there is, or you can observe a reduced global interest for the Gulf region. I think everybody's talking about the security situation in the Indo-Pacific now, and less in the Gulf region. And that may be the case for some European countries, may be the case for the US as well, that they are not so much focusing on the Gulf region as they did before. At the same time, I think we can see that the cooperation between the EU countries and GCC is really strong and being reinforced. And the EU is also looking at regional de-escalation and confidence building measures in the region. So I think there is some focus still, and especially from the Europeans, I think it's not weakening at all. And the last point is obviously we have to discuss, in our view, the elephant in the room, how we approach the Iranians there. We would very much like to get them around the table also, and to have a discussion on how to decrease tensions there, but we have not really been very successful as of yet. I think perhaps, as my last point, there may be something good coming out of the JCPOA negotiations. We'll have to wait and see, but I think certainly there is a constructive momentum there. I think I will stop here within my 10 minutes and looking forward to the discussion. Thanks.
Great, thank you very much, both for the good overview and understanding a little bit what MSO is about, and then also talking a little bit about the current environment. And just to sort of alert you already, I'm going to be interested in following up on your last sort of sentence there about what might come out of the JCPOA and whether this might not be an opportunity then to carry forward some of that momentum and maybe encourage then more of those connections also to Iran on maritime security issues. So be interested to explore that a little bit later on. Let me get to Jeffrey Payne. First of all, thanks for joining us so early in the morning. I know in Washington it's a different time zone, so and also to agreeing on a very late request from my end to join this discussion. So I'm really appreciative of that. I think you're going to be able to provide us a little bit more of the U.S. perspective, but also the broader connections to the Indo-Pacific. I think that is also an issue that you deal a great deal with. So Jeffrey, why don't you go ahead?
Well, thank you, Christian, for the invite. It's lovely to join everyone this morning. I hope everyone's doing well. I'm going to try to wrangle all the topics in the few minutes I have. There's a lot here, but I'm going to start with kind of the overarching, what I see as the primary structural challenge that exists in these waters, and the operational challenge set, and then the strategic aim that should exist for both non-regional and regional actors. The main structural problem that exists in these waters, I think I would agree with Mustafa in that there is, for a region that is comprehensively reliant on oceanic trade for their economic well-being, there is a pervasiveness of sea blindness throughout the Middle East and throughout the Arabian Peninsula. Now, this is not unique to the Arabian Peninsula. I'm not trying to say that the Arabian Peninsula is different. Most states around the world suffer from sea blindness, and that is, another way of putting it, is a comprehensive lack of maritime domain awareness. And this is something that navies around the world and coast guards around the world know is a huge challenge, know that they have insufficiently addressed it. And so as a result, the maritime domain becomes a niche political issue. It's prioritized in an odd way, even though it's critical for essentially any littoral state. Your everything from your food supply to your trade to your natural resource production is all going to be reliant upon the water. We don't understand it or design our policies as such. So that's a structural a problem that exists in the Gulf region today. Operationally, it's the question of how do we do this? How do we protect ourselves from state actors who are not in conjunction with the standard rules, protocols, and norms? Non-state actors that are engaged in all sorts of illicit activity. And then the strategic, and that is, what is our real aim and goal when it comes to the security of the maritime domain? And so from a US point of view, and my remarks today represent just my own, none of the institutions I'm affiliated with, but the scale of the challenge set in the water is immense. It's just that it's often hidden. It's asymmetric in operation. The Iranians have highlighted this in how they have pursued some of their interests in the region. It's not unique to the Arabian Peninsula as well. You could look to Southeast Asia, the Gulf of Guinea, the Caribbean, even the Black Sea currently, given the current situation, and obviously the South China Sea looms large in how increasingly the threats are no longer navies standing opposed to one another, demarcating exclusive economic zones, signaling to the rest of the world that they are going to be responsible for the security of specific choke points. We've entered a realm or a period of asymmetric operation on our waters and even beneath our waters. And this is going to be the trend as we go. And so what does this mean for the US Navy and how we look at the waters of the Arabian Peninsula? One is that navies themselves, and the US Navy in particular, will need to expand their operational comfort zone. A lot of the things that the US Navy is encountering in the waters of the Red Sea, of the Western Indian Ocean, of the Gulf itself, are things that are not traditionally Navy. We're talking about drug interdiction. We're talking about arms interdiction. We're talking about human trafficking. We're talking about asymmetric operations that rely upon commercially flagged transports. These are things that international rules and norms were not set up to necessarily address, and navies are not comfortable with them. So the US Navy is openly developing, considering changing some operational mandates to become more adept at this. But Coast Guards and other law enforcement maritime constabularies will be the key kind of leaders on this, because they are inherently built to address some of these asymmetric operations, because their orientation is towards the non-state actor. And this is where a lot of the asymmetry comes into play. It also means that for Navy's premier systems and tools, to some degree, are going to become less essential. In a lot of ways, getting a brand new guided missile frigate, or, for the US Navy, an aircraft carrier strike group, will become less essential for maritime security than making sure what we do have on the books is used more effectively, and how to integrate new technologies into the existing platforms that happen. And this is a lesson that I think is very relevant for the states of the Arabian Peninsula. The questions of not necessarily building your capacity, but enhancing your capability. Making sure your sailors are better at what they do, making sure that your command structure has a greater strategic field of vision. That's kind of a change in mindset that I think is becoming a global trend. We also have a data revolution on the horizon. This is something that a lot of people outside of the maritime domain don't talk about. The amount of commercially available data sets that are going to be available will in the long run make us more adept at addressing things like, for instance, some of the actions Iran has done or linked to when it comes to smuggling arms and other capabilities to, say, the Houthis or to other proxy actors. This is something that this data is not going to be a silver bullet, but it's going to provide us a lot more tools in our toolbox to address this asymmetric challenge. And then finally, and I think I'm echoing both my previous speakers, and that is we have a real trust deficit. These waters feature the most successful international maritime partnership in human history, combined maritime forces. And when we have conversations about maritime security, very, very few people even bring up the existence of combined maritime forces. This is something that its task forces have done everything from addressing piracy to trying to address smuggling, to trying to better enhance the security of the Gulf and the waters of the Gulf itself. A lot of institutions that already exist in this region, where the US is either a partner of or supporter of them, that need to become more overtly part of the political conversation. Ad hoc efforts, like, for instance, the current focus of both operations on the Strait of Hormuz, are incredibly advantageous and beneficial, but they're temporary in structure. But there are other things like combined maritime forces that are permanent, that show the stakeholders of both regional and non-regional actors. So my final comments before I turn it back to Christian for the discussion is how the US sees the waters of this region as it relates to the Indo-Pacific. Well, the point is the Indo-Pacific of the United States, the concept it uses is in evolution. Right now, it corresponds with the area of responsibility of Indo-Pacific Command. But the Indian Ocean in total is increasingly becoming part of the conversation of the Indo-Pacific. And that's because that's just the reality of geography. And I think the Gulf in particular suffers from a same mindset of limited viewpoint on how this concept impacts them. There is an inward-looking necessity because of some of the security crises and because of some of the historical relationships and diplomacy that exist inside the Gulf, where the world kind of comes to the Gulf versus the Gulf coming to the world. I think the Indo-Pacific concept matters a great deal for the long-term trajectory of Gulf diplomacy, of Gulf economic growth. And so my simple point here is the Gulf is part of the Indo-Pacific. And the sooner that is adopted, and the sooner that the US kind of sees that kind of reality the more a kind of more comprehensive approach to maritime security. I think you will see in the long run greater debate about the US naval presence purely focused on the Gulf, But the waters of around the Arabian Peninsula remain critical to the United States. I think that the interest, though, is increasingly moving southward. So protecting the Strait of Hormuz from the Western Indian Ocean and a greater presence in the Red Sea, because that's where a lot of these challenges are becoming very obvious, and the scale of them is becoming very dangerous. So for the United States, I think you're going to remain, the Fifth Fleet's going nowhere. The technology is changing, the methodology is going to advance, and the geographic focus may switch a little bit. But the overall kind of focal point on these waters is not going to change. It's just a matter of how it connects to some of these larger concepts. Not happy to answer any more questions, but Christian, I'll turn it back over to you.
Thanks a lot, Jeff. Extremely interesting. Again, I like the fact of highlighting the structural limitations that you started your comments out with, but then focusing also on the overall complexity of the issue with the various aspects of asymmetry playing a role. And then, of course, it's a very interesting sort of focus on where are US perspectives with regard to the region maybe adjusting or still focused on the Gulf, but maybe changing just a little bit in there. I don't know, Mustafa, did you want to come in at this place? Maybe you have a comment?
If you allowed me, yes. You see, from the region, we ask, I believe, very legitimate question. This is the European International US Initiative. How many Iranian attacks have been prevented? How many Iranian attacks have been punished? How many Houthis attacks have been punished? The region asking this question, okay, we know there is a structure, naval structure, European / Western US, all this cooperation. But this cooperation is not really producing result in the field. It is not prevent, the Iranian can do whatever they want. And I remind you that the attack on the hijacking of the British oil tanker happened under the nose of the US Fifth Fleet, and they couldn't do anything. So there is a political, we believe, there's a political decision that they will not, okay, these forces there, try to do the job, but the job is there is no political will to really make this capacity very effective to protect the security and the freedom of navigation in the region.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, definitely we have this situation, of course, where the debate in the region will focus on what the impact of these missions is in the end of the day. And it also will play into the debate overall of how much support there will be for other initiatives, for future initiatives, if current initiatives don't really show specific results. So maybe I can turn that for a second to Ambassador Tange, just to ask, you mentioned also at the outset sort of that the number of incidences, of course, have increased in the region, while the severity might not have. We have, despite these missions, still see a continuation and even an increase in incidences. So, I mean, I completely understand, you know, as you mentioned, that MSO's mission is very much to not engage and to maintain that role of neutrality. But then what can one do? What can one really impact so that you begin to see, you know, some of these instances, the number of instances are actually coming down in the region, so that we have a greater sense of security?
Yeah, thank you. Obviously, these questions are extremely difficult to answer. First of all, it's very difficult to measure the actual impact of your presence there, because it would be a bit counterfactual. How many incidents and how many actions have you avoided by simply being present? That's very difficult to find out. But we do believe that our pure presence has created an increased stability. I think also we are very aware that if we change a little bit our posture there, that we may actually do exactly the opposite to contribute to instability, to contribute to the opposite of detente, and to more aggression. I think we have to be very aware of that perspective also. But I think obviously if you ask how much value do you get from our presence there, we will not be able to answer in very clear terms that we have kind of prevented this many incidents or attacks. I think it's also necessary to mention that I do not believe that we are not prioritizing this region. Obviously, there is a lot of maritime insecurity and instability around the world, and it's very, very expensive, obviously, to send out a frigate or any kind of ship for any length of time to monitor any strait in the world. Denmark, for instance, has been active in the Gulf of Guinea, which is also a very important commercial area for us and something we need to keep an eye on. But we are also continue to be interested and present in the Gulf as well, around the area there, and we will be also that. We will continue to be that in the future. But I'm just underlining that there is a lot of different areas where you need to be present. So I do think actually that we are, with the resources, the limited resources we have, I think we're doing an okay job. I would like to be, I would like us to have more, but I think also we would like to have more resources in the Gulf of Guinea and elsewhere as well. So it's very, very difficult to prioritize. I wouldn't hope that there is a direct link between the instability and the number of resources we have there, because very much what we do now and what we believe our presence is about is also to be preventive, also to be present and be able to prevent in the situation where the violence should escalate. And obviously, it's clear to everyone that what you see at sea is very much a proliferation of other threats and conflicts you see at land that just kind of transform themselves into violence at sea. Because if you do something, if you do an operation at sea, it's very visible what you do, and it's also very easy to isolate that event from anything else because you're at the sea. So obviously it's kind of a preferred way of doing attacks and counterattacks if you have conflicts which are basically driven by conflicts at not at sea but at land.
Okay, great. Thanks for that. Jeff, I don't know if you have any comment at this stage, but I'll go ahead and also tie that already to one of the questions that has been posted in our chat here. And that is, how do you see the US playing a role in the region on maritime initiatives whilst it's taking a, in quotation marks, step back approach? Maybe you can just tackle that question then also at the same time.
Yeah, thanks. I'm not going to try to address the step back portion of it, because I think, the US definitely does not see it as a stepping back or a reconsideration. It's a reprioritization. That's what the US and a lot of the non-regional actors are doing. And it may seem, because it doesn't necessarily conform to some of the stated interest of regional states, but I mean, that's the nature of it. But I will say this, that in terms of some of the things that the questions say about Iran and the various non-state actors is a very complex one, especially in the maritime domain, because you have to follow and adapt to established rules and norms like UNCLOS and other established. You have to recognize exclusive economic zones and specifically territorial seas. The non-state actors or bad actors don't respect or follow these norms. However, from the higher side, remember that just recently, in fact, last week, was the conclusion of the joint Cutlass Express and international maritime exercise that CENTCOM and US AFRICOM put on it together. And it was one of the largest maritime training exercises in human history. And it was done as a direct response to trilateral and other bilateral arrangements Iran had, say, with China or with Russia. That's a pretty big signal showing that 32 active partnering nations, over 12,000 sailors involved, representing a substantial swath of both the Middle East and Africa, as well as the United States and allies and partners throughout the world, all engaged in joint maritime exercises from everything from humanitarian assistance, disaster relief response, search and rescue, intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance operations, and then joint operations. On the lower side, some of the things that regional states can do is start improving the internal connective tissue amongst themselves. And this is a point that Mustafa rightfully pointed out in his remarks to open this up. There needs to be more routine shipwriters, liaison officers from the Saudi Arabian Coast Guard with the Jordanian Coast Guard, with the Omani Coast Guard, with the Emirati Coast Guard, the Bahraini Coast Guard, and onwards, so that if you're following a bad actor or you're tracking a ship that you suspect to be up to no good, and they cross into another territorial sea, you will have the ability through agreements of shipwriters to continue to go after them and interdict them outside of your waters because you have that liaison officer with you. Those lower side simple agreements of getting everyone in your coast guards and navies more familiar with operating with one another and getting the political clearance from leadership to do it, that's a low hurdle to clear that can assist with this. But in the larger sense, I agree that there's no way that just because the US has 15 vessels locally deployed or 2 vessels locally deployed, you're still going to get attacks. You're still going to get this gray zone or asymmetry or whatever. It's going to pop up because the maritime space is so large and there are so many vulnerabilities to it. So in the long run, the way that, say, bad actors incur costs is cumulative. It's not tit for tat, in my opinion. So the costs go higher for when you start engaging in these asymmetric operations. It becomes harder to do them. There's less open spaces. When you do them, it's harder to deny that you're behind them. Naming and shaming, all of these things kind of bleed together. And these are lessons that were hard learned in other places. I always tell my friends in the Arabian Peninsula to look to ASEAN and Southeast Asia and some of the methodologies they use to address some of their maritime security concerns. And back to you, Christian. Thanks.
Great. Thanks, Jeff. Mustafa, there's a question for you in the chat. How do you think the 3 maritime agreements reached between Iran and Qatar at the Gas Exporting Countries Forum, notably the one on maritime transport, one between the 2 countries' port authorities, and another on the idea to connect Iran and Qatar via an underwater tunnel, will impact the maritime security arrangements of the region?
Yeah, the tunnel project is a paper project. There is no economic viability for this tunnel in any way. And there is a strategic objection to have a connection with Iran, a land connection with Iran. It's similar to the French-British connection. So I don't think this is a serious issue. This is an issue which the Qataris need now to open the communication channel with the Iranian and send goodwill to the Iranian, because the sharing the gas and the Iranian going to reactivate the agreement to invest in the gas field, which is shared with Qatar. So I understand the reason why the Qatari went that far. The question of other agreement, okay, it's already, the Qataris have a good relation with the Iranian on the import, export, port facilities. I think that the other GCC country, except Oman, will not agree with the Qataris' move to establish strong link with Iran, especially we're talking about the transportation of passenger every day, twice a day. All this, I don't think this is accepted by the other Gulf states, including Kuwait. So again, I think we have to wait and see whether all these sort of agreement going to be translated to an actual move. Yes, there is a goodwill from the Iranian, goodwill from the Qataris. but it have its justification and timing. But I don't think this major project going to produce any result.
Well, I hope that this is not the precursor of another sort of area of dispute with the Qataris within the GCC framework. So let's hope it doesn't develop into that further. Ambassador Tanga, I just wanted to come back to you on sort of what I mentioned earlier in terms of maybe the outcome of the possible outcome of an agreement in Vienna on the nuclear talks, and how this might impact then European approach, European open up windows of possibility to engage in maritime security discussions with Iran. You mentioned already that it's been very difficult for the Europes to engage Iran on this issue. At the same time, we do have the aspect that much of this is, of course, a political issue, that we need this political dialogue to also be able to handle more of the hard security issues. What do you see this? Where do you see this going then? Is there a possibility that there will be further initiatives from the European side to engage Iran on maritime issues if the JCPOA does come about and it opens the window?
Yes, I do actually. First of all, I think it's necessary to underline that we are not there yet, but I believe there is a window of opportunity now, and I think we should certainly exploit that. But I also believe that if we're able to make an agreement and to follow through with the agreement, and also we include the US again, I think this could lead to a new kind of positive foundation for further improvements as well. It could go any way, obviously, as it always can in these instances, but I think it's very positive if we are able to get a little bit back on track with this. I think it's very important for the whole Western world that we're able to kind of contain again and to get an agreement with the Iranians on this. And I'm sure there will be a lot of spillover also on potentially on maritime security, because I think this whole situation we have been living the last couple of years is also a consequence of the negotiations and the JCPOA track being blocked for a while. So I think again we see the consequences of that at sea, but I think we could also see the opposite reaction. If things are going well, we will see less action at sea. Could I just make another comment while I have the floor here? Because there was a question regarding the private logistic company's role, and if you include in that also, I think the ship owners. I think for us, at least for the Danish ship owners, and we are a maritime nation of a considerable size. I think we're the sixth in the world. For them, they don't really see a problem navigating through the Strait of Hormuz for the time being, and they don't really have a big interest in the mission that we are conducting for the time being. Interestingly enough, completely contrary to, for instance, the situation in the Gulf of Guinea. So basically, they feel that as long as they obey with the rules and don't violate the sanctions and pay the duties and taxes, they believe their analysis is that they have no problem for the time being. I think it's also necessary to underline when we have this discussion about what is the situation right now. I think our perspective is that could very rapidly deteriorate if you have one of the conflicts that you always see in the region, unfortunately, being transforming itself into the sea. We'll have a different situation. But I'm just necessary for me to underline that the private business here, they don't believe that the situation now is terribly violent. Thanks.
Okay, thanks for that. I don't know if Jeff or Mustafa wanted to come in on this question on the private logistics companies that was in the chat. Was there any comments from your side on that?
I don't think that there will be a major role for the private sector, in this field. I don't see it actually. The problem is much bigger than that. The problem is, and at least how I feel from the region, the problem is it's not a private, it's not a small state, it's not it needs a more international collective action to deal with the problem. I don't see some sort of marginal contribution or solution will do a lot of bring any change to the situation.
Jeff, I know you've got to go pretty soon. We're coming also to the end of our hour. I just wanted to give you the opportunity to maybe just a final comment or two in case you want to come in at this stage before we finish our webinar.
Well, thank you. Again, it was a pleasure joining everyone. Just as for the intersection between private and public interests at sea, I agree that individual ships and even individual private interests don't necessarily have an immense role to play in the current kind of environmental space, but in the long run, they are going to become critical because as certain technological aspects evolve and become more readily available, legitimate sailors and legitimate maritime enterprises are going to be critical for reporting certain activities, whether it be suspected illicit activity, whether it be state actors not acting in accordance with established rules and norms. These things are going to become more critical, and those conversations are starting to happen, but it needs to be something that is taken on much more readily, because it sounds silly, but one of the most effective ways of stopping traffickers is naming and shaming, because once you have a vessel attached, you may not be able to interdict them or stop them according to maritime law, but if you show images of said vessel engaged in it, everyone attached to that vessel, whether they be a sailor, an insurer, an owner, or a captain, is perpetually kind of given a black mark that rides with them. And so it limits the amount of ports that they can visit. It limits what countries will allow them to sail under their flags. Insurance provision becomes much more complicated. And this is something that legitimate companies need to get involved in. We just haven't figured out the right interface for it yet, but that is something in the long run that will be helpful. But again, thanks so much for having me this morning.
Definitely. Thanks a lot, Jeff, for joining us. Very appreciative of you taking your time. I will go to one more question in the chat, and if you need to go, don't worry about it. You click out anytime you need to. I wanted to go to this question on the Red Sea region that's in the chat, and I'll pose it to Mustafa, and that we can then finish our conversations. I'll just read it out quickly. Given that the Red Sea region has very few economic, security, and environmental agreements between neighboring countries, Saudi Arabia has made efforts to move forward on the political front. King Salman established a new Red Sea Council aimed at securing the waterways of the Red Sea and the Gulf of Aden between the coastal states. However, the initiative has thus far failed to yield the intended results. What are the reasons for that? And does this initiative stand a chance of turning into a feasible maritime security architecture? Mustafa, you want to come in on that?
Is it?
Yeah, Mustafa,
Yeah.
please.
Yeah, it's basically the Saudis try to establish a regional system, at least for the Red Sea. But they discover the task is more complicated than that. It is a political task. It's not the question of this country feeling that there's a threat and challenges and they have to cooperate. It is beyond their ability to decide. It is international, great power issue. And that's why the Saudis are unable to achieve what they try to achieve, some sort of regional security for the countries which bordering the Red Sea. And I don't think they can really activate this sort of, because if you look at all these states, first, the influence of Saudi Arabia is not that strong, can bring this state to join together and accept the Saudis' leading role in this initiative. And the other thing is the task is very complicated. There is Chinese interest, there is Russian interest, there is US interest, French interest. This is not simply You can't just bring this state and they agree on what you want to do. So I don't think the only option that Saudis now have to work on is to strengthen their naval capacity in the Red Sea. You have to remember, in general, the share of the naval capacity in the Saudis' expenditure, military expenditure, is less than 10%. The major part usually going to the Air Force and land forces. And now the Saudis feel there is, the international community cannot provide protection. They cannot fill the gap. And the group sponsored, like Houthi sponsor, militia sponsored by external state, can destroy your security. So I think the Saudis, at least for the coming years, they're going to invest for self-defense and building maritime self-capacity to protect the Red Sea. This is supported, by the way, by the Egyptian, and for a certain degree with the Israelis as well, because all these countries really sharing the water of the Red Sea. There is no agreement between these powers, the Egyptian, the Saudi, the Israeli. But I think that if there any chance you have some sort of coalition of a state which sharing the security, I don't think this small state like Djibouti or all these small states can have an effect, because these states have linked to the big power policy. I think you have to go to the regional beneficiaries, and here we're talking about the three power in the Red Sea: Egypt, Israel, and Saudi Arabia.
Excellent. Thanks so much. Well, an hour always goes by quite quickly, and I believe we've only sort of scratched the surface. There's a lot of different issues here that we can, of course, dig a lot deeper into. But I think we've done, it's been an insightful discussion in terms of outlining some of the critical issues and looking at it from the different three regional perspectives that we have here from the Gulf, from the European and from the American angle. So I'm very thankful to all our three speakers for providing us with their comments. There will be a recording of this webinar that will also be available on the GRC YouTube channel. So you will be able to see it at a later stage. Please feel free also then to distribute the link around, so in case other people are interested, then that they can also still follow and the discussions as well. Thank you very much, Ambassador Tanger, for joining us. We look forward to being in touch also on this issue, as well as other things, maybe the wider regional security issues in the region. I know that there are a lot of European initiatives now being put forward. We've had just a very successful GCC EU ministerial meeting in Brussels on Monday, the first time we've had this meeting in 6 years. I also know that there's a communication coming forward from the European Commission later on this spring, hopefully maybe around April, on relations with the Gulf states. So certainly there's a lot of movement on this front, and that's something that we also want to keenly follow at the Gulf Research Center. So let me just thank you again for joining, also for the audience for the questions they posed. We will be in touch with further announcements on webinars in the near future. And please, in the meantime, don't hesitate to contact us if we can be helpful. And we look forward to staying in touch with everybody. So thanks a lot. Have a great evening, afternoon, or late morning. Jeff is already gone.
You too. Thank you, Christian. Thank you.
Thank you.